I just wonder how many people know about the Bancroft Institute, where the names comes from. Anybody knows about Bancroft? No? Okay, I know John. No, for sure. He's part of the committee members. We have quite a member, committee member here, so you're not allowed to answer that question. Okay, so Bancroft, the name of the Bancroft institution come not from the city, it's actually from the person who represent from unions and workers when the workers' compensation settled like at the beginning 100 years ago. So we after that name because we kind of respect that person who worked for the injured workers and the worker. That's how we got the name. Also, do you know how long Bancroft been doing this kind of a session? Anybody know? How many years? 60 years? Oh, close. 60 years, close. Yeah, it's over, I think, 20 years, right? Over 20 years, yes. So look, we as injured worker community, right? This session is for injured worker community particularly, and this is great that a lot of injured worker come out today and talk about the issue we have and see how we can fight back with the researchers, academia, and a lot of unions and right. So this is the way we can fight. But we learned a lot today, right? But we need action. We will talk more about the action later at the session, right? Just keep staying and come back and sit. We're gonna start a session, second panel discussion. I'm gonna start with the introduction of the panelists, right? Um, I think Laura is here at the front here. Hi, Laura. I'm glad that you're here. I'd like to introduce Laura Kateri. She's the immediate host president of Canada Without Poverty, previously National Anti-Poverty Organization, or NAPO. Those mission is the eradication of poverty through the realization of human rights. CMP's entire board is made up of members with a significant lived experience of poverty. Since 2011, she has been a Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction Community champion with the lived experience of poverty and disability, subsequently serving as a chair of their social assistance working group and the first person with the lived experience to sit on their operational steering committee. She now works with the team part time as champion coordinator. It was her honor in 2017 to join the other members of a civil society in Geneva to testify at Canada CRPD review. Laura spoke to the internationally of poverty and disability through her involvement with Canada Without the Poverty. So welcome, Laura, and she will talk more detail about her work. Also, I'd like to introduce Steve Mentee just beside me. He's really a great activist from Ontario Network of Injured Workers Group. Steve was injured in an industrial accident in 1978 and went through the workers' compensation system and saw firsthand how it failed many injured workers. He has been active ever since, working to improve the lives of injured and disabled workers across Canada. Founding members of the Thunder Bay and District Injured Workers Support Group, the Ontario Network of Injured Worker Group, and the Canadian Injured Worker Alliances. In the early 1990s, Steve served on the Ontario Workers' Compensation Board of Directors. He is presently serving as chair of Research Action Committee of the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Group, ONWIG, and sit on the executive committee of the Center for Research on the Work Disability Policy. Right? So let's hear more from Steve and Laura.
Thanks so much, Sang Hung. So, Laura, would you start us off? I guess we each have about 15 minutes, and then there'll be about 15 minutes for Q&A. So, over to you, Laura.
Thank you. My poor little laptop, this is the third webinar in less than 24 hours I've been on, so it's been a busy day, but I'm glad to be able to participate with you, even though physically it would be very difficult for me to travel back and forth. Being able to use this technology and be able to share is fantastic. I'm going to give you a very brief about me so you sort of understand where I'm coming from when I talk about these issues. I would have been considered middle class, upper middle class income, on the brink of actually purchasing my first home on my own. My first brand new car, all those firsts in my early 30s, when I started to get ill. And unfortunately, it got worse. And with all the investigations they were doing, I lost long-term disability benefits on December 12th because my company was purchased by another company and we were laid off. And I was declared disabled January 4th. So for 17 years ago, I became a member of the social assistance cohort in this province. I also am in receipt of CPP disability, and I qualify for the disability tax credit, just to give you an idea of severity, I guess is the word. It wasn't until 2011 when I got really frustrated, understanding that even though my mind was still capable to a certain extent of working, the number of hours I could work was limited and I would never escape poverty. I started to look at self-employment and contract work. And within days, the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction put out a call for people with lived experience of poverty, and if they wanted to join the main group, the broader discussion group. And so I applied. And it was through feeling meaningful engagement with them and being able to participate in society that I wanted to do more. And I saw a call for Canada Without Poverty, and I applied. And what was so intriguing for me was this notion that any benefit I had, whether it be medical benefits, income benefits, being housed, making sure I was housed, all of that fell under human rights, and that I was allowed to live with dignity. In summation, really, human rights, what we're saying is everyone is entitled to a certain level of humanity so that they can live, they can engage in the community around them. And just refuting, moving against the stigma and the shame of not being employed. Until that point in my life, employment really defined who I was, and I had to learn otherwise, that there was more to life than a job. So when in 2017, or it was approaching, Canada's review under the Convention of Rights for Persons with Disability came up, my staff at Canada Without Poverty said, you're on the board and you're always talking about disability and the unfairness in systems in Canada. We should make an application. And so staff did work with your previous panelists, Steve and Carrie, and a number of people actually, to start submitting our pre-sessions. Just basically documentation on what was going on. And for myself, it was probably one of those experiences that I think defined all my volunteer work and all my community work. This idea that you can be a member of civil society and go to the UN and be heard as part of that review process. It was, I'd say, a high point in my life. I'm very proud of that honor. And though I speak a lot as I go around on my own personal experiences, being able to go there and talk about persons with mental health issues being the largest group that are homeless in Canada, and why this disability meant that they were homeless and poor and dying so much younger than everyone else, and what was the government's response. And I learned so much from this experience, and I think that was a takeaway I wasn't expecting, to be able to meet people who were working in employment and disability rights and hear them talk about the fact that people with severe and very severe disabilities, even when they worked, were making less than half of our peers of the same age group, same single status, realizing that the government benefits that we did receive, even if we're low income, were not topping us up to anywhere near what the average was. And hearing from people with different disabilities was enlightening for me. It's hard negotiation. My background is with income security. And I believe income security, whether you plan to go back to work or not, is such an integral part of recovery. Myself, I was 4 years into my illness before I had a specialist tell me, well, if you'd had adequate food and good food, if you had exercise, if you had no stress, you could have gone in remission in the first 2 years. And hearing that and knowing what public systems are like for people, and that more and more people are either being deemed or sent over to the ODSP system, my fight kind of becomes your fight too. And knowing that none of these systems provide anything near adequacy was deeply disturbing. I have to admit, my staff did most of the work around this, and my staff were lawyers. Our president of Canada our director of Canada Without Poverty just also happens to be a special rapporteur for housing at the UN. So it was much easier to leave it up to them to do the legwork. As a board member, I don't do the day-to-day activities. But I found learning the art of negotiation when we got there was really important. And you rapidly learn what your issues are in one province aren't the same as what issues are in other provinces. So my favorite example was learning disability definitions varied dramatically across Canada at the provincial level. And because it did, what they needed and to complain about and what they were asking the federal government for a comprehensive definition put the one we fought for in Ontario at risk, because we had at the time the most comprehensive definition. After the spring's budget, I'm not sure if that's going to be true anymore, because there is rumor in Ontario that will be changing. So hearing and learning was important. And I'm going to borrow a little from my everyday job. So what I actually do for the Hamilton Roundtable is campaign coordination. which I think is going to lead exactly into what you'll be talking about next. So, understanding that disability, even though we have higher poverty rates, even though we're a significant element of the population of Canada, it looks about 22% of Canadians identify as having a disability. We are not, no one advocates for us. So, for example, one of the webinars I was just at was on basic income. And in the most recent costing report, they were not going to do any supplement for people with disabilities, regardless of the fact that we know persons with disabilities have additional expenditures, and not always medical ones. Just the fact that you live at a lower income level for longer periods of time, my own, it will be for the rest of my life. There are costs to that in maintaining your dwelling, personal clothing, and I apologize, my balcony door is open, so you may have heard a motorcycle screaming by right now. All those things have a cost, and internationally, the medical community has been looking at that and what is the cost of disability. And so that is why in Ontario, when we did the basic income pilot, we put forward the $6,000 supplement. But with this basic income proposal, they're looking at no supplement. And what I got was, well, it's too hard to get a disability label, and my husband doesn't have one, and I'm not going to stand behind anyone getting a supplement if other people can't have it because their doctor doesn't know how to fill a form out. And it's just like, wow. But that is where we're at. And so part of my talking to you today, I think the important part is making sure you understand people with disabilities need to reach out to each other, whether it be injured workers, whether it be people with cognitive disabilities, whether it be mental health, all groups, all levels of disability really need to start networking. And being able to do that, I think, will build strengths within each of our movements for whatever we need to get done. For me,
you have 2 minutes left.
Okay. For me, the UN stage, sorry, let me start that again. For me, the UN stage was the ability to put on record to the rest of the world that despite Canada's claims to be a leader in human rights, when it comes to intersectionality, in this case, disability, they're not. And in fact, they don't even collect enough data around us. They don't know actually how many of us are disabled. They don't know how many children are disabled. So putting that forward in a context that brings all of us together, I think just strengthens us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I met Laura sometime last year in a similar session like this, and her message and her personal experience brings so much power and passion, and thank you so much for that. And the message I'm bringing is from the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. So we're the provincial body that was started in 1990 to bring together all the local groups that were working away kind of in their own local areas to cooperate really around political action. That's really why we got together, so that we could all say, together we have more power, and we want to try to change the system so it's better for all workers, not just those in Thunder Bay or Toronto, but everywhere. And it's been around challenging power and challenging injustice. And that's what has guided us as an organization for the last 30 years. And it's so interesting because when we talk to injured workers about what's happening to them in their life, they also want to challenge what's happening. And oftentimes it's like, let's take him to court. Well, when we look at that, we kind of go, that's really hard to do for workers' compensation because the law says you can't take it to court. You got to stay within the system, the administrative justice system. And when we began learning about international human rights, and a big thank you to Jeffrey for really kind of cluing us in on some of this, we went, hey, maybe there's another forum that we can challenge the justice of what they're doing to us that could get some resonance in the larger community. We realized, okay, as was pointed out in the earlier session, the United Nations doesn't have the power to change the law and the system in Canada. But we don't have that power either. But we're not going to give up, right? How do we use the tools that are available to us, any variety of tools, to try to increase our political power? And at this point, too, I want to say thank you to all the folks that already spoke here today, because they've all helped us learn about how to be more effective in getting our issues onto the table. And it's not just those four people, it's the organizations and the connections that brought them to where they are. And as Jeffrey was talking about earlier, it's to those workers in the 1940s who set the stage around the human rights of workers. And that's what we are. We're workers who have been injured and left to rot. I hate to say that word, but that's how it feels a lot of time, that we've been thrown away because we're no longer 100% of what we used to be able to do. So as I was introduced, I'm now the chair of our Research Action Committee. And I've been spending the last 25 years to kind of try to build the link with the academic community, that research world, the university folks, that can validate and strengthen our own experiences. We've learned things along the way, but lots of times we don't learn stuff because we know it, we lived it, we are it. But when we go to the powers that be and tell our story, they go, oh, that's nice. But what about the facts and figures? You know, what about this bigger context? And those partnerships with the academic community have helped us put those issues on the table. So here's the concrete example with our submission to the United Nations, to the CRPD. We had met Jeffrey about 4 or 5 years ago, and his interest and passion around the human rights of workers. And when we saw that Canada adopted the optional protocol, that we could take a complaint there, we went, well, what do we do? How do we do it? I don't know. What the heck? Phone Jeffrey. Help us out. Well, not only did he take our call, but he said, I will join you in the struggle. Like, whoa, oh my God. This is like beyond our expectations of academics entirely. But it's now part of our expectations, Jeffrey. That's it. So when we think about our submission, our work around the United Nations, we said, how do we plug that into our ongoing campaign, as Laura talked about, and as Carrie talked about earlier, that the United Nations can make recommendations, but in order to make those recommendations real, there's got to be power on the ground who are motivated to move that forward. The United Nations is going to make the report and they're going to disappear. What's left? It's us. That's what's left. So if we know that forever as injured workers, if we don't lobby, and Laura started to talk about that, if we don't talk about these issues, no one's going to talk about it. And part of our challenge is that we're invisible. Most people in Ontario and in Canada don't really know about workers' compensation, and they don't really know about injured workers. And so they don't have a lot of sympathy or interest in it. They haven't really connected that they're healthy and fine and the life's good. But what about that 1 second, that 1 minute, or sometimes years of cumulative trauma that's going to lead to lifelong disability? What happens then? So part of our challenge is making that real and making that public. So when we looked at our work with United Nations, we said, okay, we want to actually take a complaint, an individual complaint, to the United Nations. And there's a lot of issues that we face as injured workers, but that issue of deeming seems to be the one that is most widespread and has the most impact on lots of workers. And as we started talking about it, we meet once a month on conference call. And as I said, Jeffrey joined our committee in that struggle. We saw and learned that there's more than that individual complaint process. There are a number of other steps along the way. So we're learning. And Jeffrey comes to us in the one meeting and says, hey, Canada's being reviewed right now. If we do a submission now, we can start to set the stage, build a foundation of understanding at the United Nations about our issues. Because just because they're experts about disability doesn't mean they actually know about workers' compensation and injured workers. We're still kind of invisible and hidden. So how can we educate the United Nations about our situation and our issues so that when we get to that point of taking an individual complaint forward, they already know about it? And how do we build those links? And as Laura talked about, we said, hey, other disability rights groups are doing the same thing. Let's work together. Not that we're going to give up anything we're working on, but to recognize our commonality and say, there's a lot of commonality. Let's do as much as we can commonly, but if we need to focus on different areas, that's fine. That's cool. And how do we integrate that into our larger campaign? So we went, all right, we're going to make a submission. We're going to also cooperate with the other civil society folks that are also making submissions. So we'll do part of ours, we'll go with them, and we'll have our own. And we were all excited as a committee and moved forward on that. And when we brought our recommendation to our annual general meeting last June, where all of our delegates from across the province were together, and we table this and say, what do you think? Should we do this? It was unanimous support in the room. Everyone said, yeah, let's do it. Let's challenge. And you could see the energy of even the idea buoyed our members. And that has happened everywhere we go. Whenever we talk about our challenges, our submission to the United Nations, people feel empowered. And that's part of our bigger strategy because we want to build a movement. And that means more people being turned on and being involved and participating. So our strategies for the last 30 years is to kind of go, our first group that we wanted to target was organized labor because we're workers. So were they. They're our first point. And people with disabilities, hey, we're the same. We face the same challenges, the same issues. When we're working with academics, we opened up a whole new realm of people that are interested and are looking at our issues. So we're always trying to build more and more so that more people will actually take on these issues. And
two more minutes.
2 minutes. So when we did our submission, which was in September this year, we sent out media release all across the province. Hey, we're doing a submission. And we got a fair amount of media coverage from around the province. And we went, okay, we've just achieved one goal right there. We put in front of the public that we're there at the United Nations. And they started talking about what's the issue. And we were able to talk about deeming. And as we research more and we connect with Steve and others, and we learn and we sign up for webinars, we see there's more and more steps along the way where we can popularize our issues. So there was just a report from the special rapporteur. And we look at that report together and we see there's a number of points in there that strengthen our position. And Canada's making their submission in April, from what we understand. So we're planning another media release and media events that say, hey, look, the United Nations kind of got back to us. Well, they didn't really, but they published public information that we can then use to say, look, they're saying it's not fair either. And to keep moving that forward. And at the same time, we want to make life better for our folks, for injured workers now. We see that, as Steve pointed out, it's taken us, 40, 50, 60 years to get to where we are around human rights. So we got to buckle in for the long haul, for that big, long fight. But at the same time, we want to make our lives better now. And part of that is to feel like we've got power. And that's one of the things that gives us. People go, we are making a difference. There's hope for the future. And we have to, keep that flame underneath that hope so that people are able to resist the oppression that we are oftentimes under and fight back. And with that, I want to say thank you very much, and we'll go to questions.
Yes. Let's give it up, Lola and Jerry, to Steve. Thank you so much. As you know, this session is about community organizing for human rights, right? So we're going to have some time, like 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any question, just raise your hand. I will go around and take the question, and Steve and Laura probably can answer some question. Okay?
We're going to appoint the injured workers. We're going to start to appoint Jeffrey for that, because he was the one that came with the idea, and we are very happy with that. So that's it.
So anybody else? Any comments or the question? Yes, Carl?
Okay, Steve, here I come. One thing that's going on that we can do, I don't know how many people know this, but the NDP introduced a private members bill in the House to eliminate deeming. The government has the last say in when they actually move this thing forward. It's passed its first reading. And I think one of the things we can do is, if you contact your MPP, particularly NDP or Conservatives, whichever you want, is to get them to push this private members bill forward. It's just sitting in the legislature right now. We don't know when they're going to bring it forward. We're trying to find that out. So thanks for your evaluation and your talk about organizing. It's so damn important that we get the message out in the community and amongst ourselves to get ourselves mobilized for change. It's time.
Anybody else? Also, if we have any question from the webinar, we can take some questions as well. Just let Paul know.
Thanks, Sehun. John McKinnon here. I have a question. Maybe Laura and Steve Esty could comment on a bit. I'm just wondering, what actually happens when you get to Geneva? What goes on there? What's it like? Maybe Laura, if you want to start off, and then Stephen.
Sure. So one one thing, and it's an important one, is to ensure that you have funding to get there and to pay for hotel and food. We kindly had sponsorship of QP Locals to ensure that we get to Geneva, because it is not an inexpensive city. When we got there, we got to meet with other society groups that were going to be presenting, and it was facilitated by an assistant for the special rapporteur that was doing a report based on own research as well as our presentation. And so trying to facilitate what we were going to go after. And
Steve Esty, can you respond to?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, great. Sorry, Laura's audio cut out. I just say that in terms of the question, what happens when you get to Geneva, I think that the big thing is that these committees receive massive amounts of information from a number of countries for every session. So they're happening at different levels or different parts of the process going on and so on. There are two key points of intervention for civil society in Geneva. The first one is the one that we've just been through, where we get to ask the government through the committee questions about their implementation. So that generates a document that came out last September called the List of Issues Prior to Reporting. And that's the thing that the Government of Canada needs to respond to. The second thing is that now that we're into the process, we are just beginning to develop a parallel report ourselves. But what you need to keep in mind is that when you get to Geneva, these committees might have 4 or 5 countries under review at different stages with dozens or hundreds of pages of information that they're all trying to absorb. So what I've found over a number of visits to Geneva is that it really helps to sit and try to talk specifically with committee members about what your priorities are. I felt that really it's a matter of prioritization because there's so much information there. You really need to say, these are the things that are most important for people with disabilities in Canada. I think that, the committee members themselves are from all around the world. You've got Africans, Asians, Latin Americans, and all of the things that we take for granted, or many of the things that we take for granted in our system, are completely foreign to them. So a lot of times, a lot of the work is just simply to try and explain the context and that kind of stuff. So that's what I think that the key points of what happened in Geneva are, and I think they're really important for civil society to participate in those things. Carrie has also been to Geneva a number of times. Carrie, do you want to make a comment here?
I completely agree with what Laura and Steve has said. I'll just add 2 quick points. The first is that sometimes, and depending on who the co-chairs of the committee are for your country review, if you can sort of develop a good relationship with them, or if you have, a relationship with them from previous work, sometimes they will allow you to kind of put forward some suggested language around what recommendations they should include in the concluding observations, or what questions they should ask to Canada in the list of issues. And that can be really, really helpful, in kind of getting your issue like front and center in the actual documents from the committee to Canada. So that's great. And that only really happens if you're kind of, on the ground working with them in their process as they're reviewing the country. The other thing that I have found really interesting is that because you're in Geneva and there are so many UN agencies headquartered there, there are so many opportunities to meet with officials from other agencies. So, for example, last time we were there, we actually had a meeting with a representative from the ILO. And I believe that the issue of deeming actually came up at that meeting. He had read Weinig's submission to the CRPD committee and, asked us about it. And so it's just interesting how you're able to feed the issues. The issues that you're bringing to the CRPD committee are kind of very targeted, and that's your main goal. But you also have opportunities to kind of talk with people in other UN agencies about those issues and sort of cross-pollinate and hope that, you know, other work or other opportunities may arise to do work within those agencies on those issues.
Should we go back to Laura? Laura, can you try?
The ability to negotiate with others, what I was getting to with you know, how many minutes you're going to be able to speak, is a lot of back-end work. So how many of you are speaking to the same issue? Can you combine those issues to make sure all the different issues can go forward? And I can't stress enough the need to do that, to build those relationships before you even get there. I fully agree with Carrie. Building relationships through this process is what it's all about. And take opportunities to go to dinner together. I know this sounds silly, but being able to just talk about where you're coming from, what your hometown looks like, and know each other as people instead of antagonists is really important. Being able to canvass the members on your community. We went there. I love my staff at Canada Without Poverty. We went there with a folder with the name, position, country, previous votes, previous comments on every single committee member. We knew what their specializations were, who was interested in what. Even being able to go forward to one of them, I had a rented UN wheelchair that I was being pushed around in because I couldn't get from Hamilton to Geneva with my electric wheelchair. And so going up in this little rented foldable wheelchair up to this member who was also in a wheelchair and went, "You live in a secondary airplane market." As soon as I went up to him, he knew. And so knowing who is interested in what becomes really important. And you can just Google who those committee members are and what their interests are, and it really works wonders. And respect the special rapporteur's time. You have to be able to go in and out. They have very little time. And in fact, at a certain point in the process, they're not even supposed to speak to us anymore. So if you get any time at all, be highly respectful and confidential about it. Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Okay, so we might have a couple more minutes for a couple of questions, maybe last question. Is there any? Yes, yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Erin. I'm a Ryerson placement student or social work placement student at CLEO, or Community Legal Education Ontario. So this year I also took a class called Human Rights for Social Workers, in which we talked about like the various frameworks or legal and administrative bodies that you can potentially go through, I guess, for human rights violations. Also, you're taught like all of your experiences, your stories are amazing, by the way, both of you or everyone really. But in terms of bringing in academia, I guess, I was just wondering if any of the organizations you've worked with accept placement students. One of the things that I think could be a really great possible connection, not all social work programs like MSW students or the master's level, they need to have, registered social worker be their supervisor. But I have had both of my placement supervisors were not registered social workers, but were in, respite or obviously a legal clinic. So I was just wondering if you've ever seen that happen in your organizations.
So yes, Canada Without Poverty. Now, unfortunately, they're located in Ottawa. I'm in Hamilton. It's odd. I know we're a national org. We do take social work students, and in fact, we have found the connection being able to go back, namely through Carleton, to have social workers and feed into their research as being really important. We also take law students because we have lawyers on staff, and we're just approved for that as well. Being able to get into agencies is really important for sure, and there are places out there that do it.
And for the Ontario network of injured workers groups, I would say yes, but with a big kind of caution, because we have no funding, we have no staff, and we all just plug in as we can. And so providing the supervision for students is a challenge. In Thunder Bay, we have had placement students for a number of times, and we found them so, not always, but it can mean that some of these students end up with a career looking at injured workers and people with disabilities. Because of the interaction of the time they spent with us, they begin to understand, and they kind of go, oh, this is so interesting. I need to do more work in it. So we really value those placements. Right now we have two law students in Thunder Bay that we're with, and we've working with four graduate students in the psychology department, talking about our mental health, because so many of our members, after all this oppression and getting screwed over and over, end up with mental health problems. And how do we deal with that? How do we support our members, and so that people feel better? And then our hope is, when you feel better, you actually feel like you can fight back.
Sorry, if I can just add one thing to that. With the Roundtable, I was thinking Canada Without Poverty, with the Roundtable in Hamilton, we work with McMaster Social Work School and Mohawk as well. And one of the big things we do, because we're a small org, there's literally 3 staff members, we will volunteer to do sort of oversee a project for students. So there's research we need done. So it's a win-win. So they will do the research for a certain issue and a project that we're working on, and we supervise them and give them the background information as well. And that's another avenue to get into the community with.
Yeah, I guess, thank you so much. Those are great examples. Just a heads up, because because so many organizations are shuttering their doors, or they're facing funding cuts and obviously can't supervise students. There has been talk that there are a lot of schools that are very short on their placement positions for their students. Like, folks are waiting months before they can even start their placements, which means they're not graduating when they had wanted to. So if anyone is interested, I would recommend contacting any local universities or anything, and asking them, getting in touch with their social work, field education coordinators, and saying, hey, we might be interested, because honestly, they're thirsty for it. So.
Okay, I think it's time to move to the last but not least a discussion on where do we go from here. And the Steve will take this discussion, right? Good.
Thank you so much, Sang Hung. So at Bancroft, we're trying to integrate research and action as well. And so we'd like to finish off all of our sessions. We usually do 3 a year, with an opportunity for us to think about action. So I've shared with you some of the things we're already thinking about in terms of moving forward. And I would include all of our folks online there as well in this discussion. The challenge, I feel like, is, okay, we've got this, what I think is like a great submission that we've done to the United Nations. And there's a number of really clear recommendations with kind of understanding of why we're going there. How is that valuable to you? What is it that we can do as an organization, or our research action committee as an example, or Bancroft, to support those efforts? One of the things that we've been trying to do in our committee is developing short little documents that explain some of the issues we're facing. One of the handouts that was available is workers' compensation follow the money. We're trying to do plain language, do facts and figures, and put in people's personal stories as well, so that we touch on a number of things, but we keep it to 1 or 2 pages. So I want to really open it up now, and from your angle, from where you sit, from as a student, as a union rep, as an injured worker, as a legal person, how can you use the work we've begun to move it forward, to broaden the understanding of these issues, and to help us set a course for the steps we take into the future? And Sang-Hung will take the microphone. Do we want to start online? Is there anyone want to start? Steve, Esty.
Hi, Steve. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Good.
I've been interested in the discussion this afternoon and thinking a lot about Carrie's presentation around the optional protocol. And I just wanted to toss out a couple of things. First of all, Steve, my sense of working with you on this over the past few years is that your organization has done some good, solid work, but a big challenge is to get above all the noise that happens in Geneva with so many issues and so many considerations and so many constituencies coming at the committee. They tend to look at more general things, broader things. And I've been thinking as we're talking here that maybe a way for you to move forward is to look at using the optional protocol, and particularly the communications mechanism that Carrie talked about, to advance this issue of deeming. So I just wanted to put that out on the table. I don't know whether it's a good idea, but I think that it's worthy of some discussion. And I think that also, if you look at situations or circumstances where the OP process has been successful, then you find it's usually a collaboration between civil society and legal practitioners or research institutes or things like this. So maybe there's an opportunity for collaboration between Bancroft Institute and your organization, Steve. I think that for me, and I'm interested in Carrie's perspective on this, but I think that what you really need to do is crack that nut around the domestic remedy. And you talked about the fact that it's a real challenge to work with, I don't know how you call it in Ontario, but the workers' compensation folks, because you can't take them to court particularly, but there are administrative laws and tribunals that you ought to be able to use and go forward and so on. So I think that some research in terms of just exactly what constitutes, how far you can take this process with domestic remedies would be a useful thing for you to engage in the short term, with a view to perhaps considering exhausting all of those things if they haven't been, and then going forward with an OP communication. Admittedly, this is a long process, but realistically, you guys have been trying to advance this thing for a number of years, and we're not going to settle it here on a Thursday afternoon. So, it's a process, and I'm just trying to outline what seems to me to be a potentially useful process. So, I'll put that up as a straw dog, and Carrie can, as usual, point out all the flaws of what I say.
A couple things come to mind about that. I think I said earlier that I think what we've seen, like looking at other countries where communications have gone forward, and there appears to have been a little bit of like the recommendations from the committee coming out of those communications have appeared to be a helpful tool for advancing the agenda domestically. I think from what I've seen, where that has been most effective is where you can get a good set of recommendations from the committee and couple that with like a really active, organized political advocacy or law reform campaign that's already going on, domestically. So in other words, if there was a strong law reform campaign that was already happening around deeming, and there was a lot of good community awareness about how it's a human rights infringement and all of the negative impacts on it, how it disproportionately impacts injured workers, and some of the personal stories, and you had some good media attention, you had some politicians that were interested in moving forward with some kind of reforms, to couple that with some good recommendations from the committee. I think that kind of creates the conditions for these things, for the recommendations from the committee, and the communication being a really helpful tool to move the issue forward domestically. That was my first point. The other point, I think, to keep in mind is that they do have, it's not called an intervener, but there is a similar kind of idea. So for communications, there is an opportunity for organizations to intervene or to kind of participate in the communication procedure under the optional protocol. So even if you had like one injured worker going ahead with an optional protocol communication, or a group of injured workers going ahead with their, individual cases or complaints, you could also think about pulling together some like disability groups, or intervene and to provide kind of a broader perspective on the issue, and really support the gravity of the rights infringement. The other thing I would think about is whether, and I don't know the answer to this, but this is a question for you, but whether the whole issue around deeming happens in other jurisdictions in Canada. Like, does it happen in other provinces and territories? Because if it does, then I think, again, like, as along the lines of what Steve was saying, I think the committee is really interested in kind of like systemic issues, or like issues that affect people with disabilities nationally across Canada. What are the national priorities? So I think if you can link it to similar things that are happening in other jurisdictions, and if it is a national issue, that can also be a way of getting greater attention.
Thanks so much, both Steve and Carrie. We are kind of in line with what you've been recommending so far. Steve, you wanted to add something?
Really quickly, Steve, I just wanted to add to what Carrie was saying in terms of this intervener thing, because I know that I know of situations where we in Canada have been asked to intervene in OP cases launched in other countries. So you ought not to confine your thinking, if you're looking for interveners, to folks in Canada. There may be people, organizations of injured workers, for example, in other countries that could intervene and help build your case. I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Anything to add, Laura?
My apologies, I had to take a media call. Can you clarify the question? I think I know from what you're talking about right now, but I just want to make sure I'm not responding to the wrong thing.
We're really talking about, where do we go next? How can we keep moving the needle on these issues?
So I'm going to give you a lesson I learned trying to move a piece of legislation in Ontario. You have your issue, but you need to be able to pivot to an audience. So your communication strategy has to be nimble enough that not only speaking to injured workers, but speaking to current workers, being able to speak to municipalities and what their impact is. You need to understand your issue in a way that you can move and pivot it so it becomes more broadly applicable. It's not just people. What's the cost to community when workers become deemed? What's the cost to other programs when workers become deemed? And I fully agree with the intervener status, especially I'm going to flip that around, that even if you're in Canada and you want to bring a court challenge, a human rights challenge internally, you can ask other organizations if they'd like to step in to your case to be able to discuss it. You don't have to go it alone. And so I just branching out to see what the impact is. Are there other programs that tend towards that as well in Ontario? And I agree with Carrie, look at other jurisdictions for sure, because it may not have the same name, but get a hold of other workers, injured workers in other territories to see what practices are unfair and see where you can coordinate as well.
Thank you so much. So let me open it up to the folks in the room here. Questions, comments, ideas, how you can help move this forward.
Thank you, everyone. This has been really enlightening and very inspiring as well. And I'm just thinking, in my mind, of how do we get this more out to our members, right? Like in my workplace, we have 600 members. And I guess there's a part of me that thinks that injured workers and workers' comp isn't something that should be seen as separate from health and safety. I feel like any one of us could be injured on the job, right? It's like a stroke of bad luck, right? So I feel like this actually is an issue that's very organic to all workers, because any of us could be there. And actually, any of us could be in poverty. They say that we're 2 paychecks away. So, and I also feel like we live in an interesting time where people are hungry for change. We see students, we see youth, we see workers. Even in my job, we've been launching solidarity with the teachers, right? Because we're both affected by a bill that's capping our wages. So I feel like there's a particular mood that we could really tap into. And so on one hand, I'm thinking, could we get, injured workers organizations to come and speak to our local? Because I didn't know anything about deeming, even as a shop steward, until I attended a WSIB training. And so you're really right, when like the public really doesn't know. And I like to pride myself on being an advocate, and I didn't even know. So I think maybe getting speakers to our locals, drawing these organic links. I'm curious to hear from people who've been doing this work. How could labor be doing this better? And I'm also curious, and this is just me thinking outside my head, when I was giving solidarity to the GM Oshawa workers, there is a retiree chapter that's attached to Unifor Local 222. And a part of me is like, could we retain injured workers from our job in our locals? I recently represented a worker who suffered PTSD on our job and ended up leaving the job because it was just too much for her, and understandably. And I still stay in touch with her, but I don't have a more structured form. So I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas. I'd really love to hear how we could be doing this better and make it stronger.
You're saying that we need your information, contact information. We'll make sure we will get connected.
So
we have a couple more.
If I could just quickly respond, definitely. Any local union that wants injured workers and advocates to come, no problem. Talk to Sang Hung, talk to John here. They'll definitely set it up. We have a injured worker speaker school that we help injured workers to be able to tell their story in an effective way. And we've been doing that for 13 years. And so we have lots of graduates. By all means. Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Janice Martel. I fight for mine workers who were forced to inhale aluminum dust on the job. My dad was one of them. First of all, I appreciate all of the speakers. This was really great. I wanted to come here today because I'm really connect with the human rights issue around being safe at work and if you're injured on the job or made ill by occupational disease, that's a human rights issue as well, because of what we're exposed to and what we continue to be exposed to in the jobs, hazards or toxic exposures that make us sick. I think that the strategies that you're doing are phenomenal. I really respect you, Jeffrey, for taking on this and doing the human rights UN thing. The work that you're doing and putting out pamphlets and stuff that have short good visuals and stuff like that, that's really helpful. I've posted some of those as well. What you're doing, there's no fault in any of that. How you do it is everything. How you do it is everything. So if you're doing rallies, being I don't like bullies, and that's part of why I fight the WSIB and oppressors or whatever. I find the system oppressive, and I don't want to be the bully either. And I think it's really important that we be respectful in what we're saying, because people will listen more. And it doesn't matter. And let me be clear, everybody has a right to be angry, and you've gone through, if you're dealing with that system, it's a horrible system. It's a very dehumanizing system, and you have a right to be angry. But if you stay stuck in that anger and that's all, you're not going to get anywhere, because you can be very just in your cause, but how you say it is everything. People who may be otherwise really empathetic to what you're saying, if all they're hearing is loud banging and stuff like that, they're like, oh, okay, it's one more protest, I just want to go away. We have too much coming at us. We're connected to our cell phones and all of that stuff. We have too much coming at us all of the time to hear what people are saying when they're just kind of being loud or complaining. And you have a right to complain. I'm not saying that you don't. Laura, I applaud you talking about your story, and Steve, that you got up from your from what you went through in work, and that you're advocating for other people. But the personal stories are so critical. We need to be able to relate to a human being and what they went through. Like Laura, when you're telling your story, I was thinking, I've always been independent, and I just kind of go and do things, and I'm one slip and fall away from being poor. You know what I mean? And it hit me. And I think that, hearing the issues and going on committees and all of those things are important, but we have to move forward with those personal stories. You think that you're irreplaceable at work, but you've seen other people go and they're not. And you try to stay connected with them and stuff, but you don't. You just move on with your job, and they become unseen. And occupational diseases are workers who suffer from those are the most unseen, because it happens so far after they've been at work. It takes a long time for a lot of those things to take hold. So I really think it's important that we tell those stories, and that's what makes it compelling. What you're doing with the UN, brings Canada into the forefront. They're very proud of themselves with their human rights issues, apart from all the Indigenous things and all the other abuses and genocides that have gone on here. You have to show, you have to shame them by bringing forward the facts and exposing what they're doing. And you're doing all of those things. I would just caution, and how you do it. How you do it is everything.
Thanks, Janice.
This video is supposed to be posted in YouTube. Even the Ontario workers getting money, if they have a lot of, and all over Canada, people they can see, get connected to fight. We need everybody. The last few months, I seen people hiding themselves in Facebook before. I can go ahead everybody. I get 2,000 people very easy now. For 2 or 3 weeks, I'm trying to get people, inter workers. I got 4 people adding me because I lost my ID. Some people blocked. Nobody's adding me inter workers. I found them. That's it. People hiding behind the computers. You're supposed to add the social media now, so easy, post videos, everybody's supposed to story. That's why I'm so upset when I'm in a computer and I see everybody's hiding. Video's supposed to be online, and I'll ask somebody, and the people are hiding. That's why I'm talking now. I'm really upset when I'm online and I see injured workers hiding themselves behind the computers.
So just in terms of a concrete follow-up on that point, and are related. So I think John has mentioned that as a follow-up, everyone who has left their email address will get a link to the video on YouTube. And so one of the concrete things we can do is share it widely with our own networks. Is anyone opposed to that here? Raise your hand if you're willing to do it. I only see 3 hands who are willing to share those links and the information about this session. All right, I'm going to come around to all your computers and make sure.
Can I, Steve, sorry to interrupt you. Can I just add that Arch has a couple of fact sheets and videos about the optional protocol on our website. So if people would like the links to those, I can send them to John McKinnon. Yeah, okay, I will do that.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Erin Doucette from Prevention Link at the OFL and formerly from Office of the Worker Advisor. So I've spent a great portion of my career representing non-unionized injured workers, and now I'm on the union side. So we do the training that you were mentioning. So I just want to say that we're really purposeful that in our training, which mostly it's union reps that do come to, but anybody who's interested in learning more about WSIB and disability accommodation. But not only is our training the how-tos, but we also really make sure we weave in the advocacy. So we definitely plug ONIWIG because it's really important. So Steve and I were just chatting about, the graphic, for example, and information like that's really helpful for us to get because we have a lot of light bulb moments when we make sure that people know about the injustice, right? This is our audience that we're speaking to. They're labor activists, and they're very, very keen to take this information back when they go to their member meetings, their labor councils, and any committees that they may be on. And so on that topic of sort of outreach and sort of going from what Janice was saying about being, mindful of how we do the work, on a small scale, and I'm thinking about the one point there about exhausting all of your options sort of domestically. So we've sort of talked about this at our OFL Comp committee meetings, is that we have to remember, for example, obviously here we're dealing with the jurisdiction of Ontario, that the workers at the WSIB are our union brothers and sisters. They are represented by QP 1750. They deal with a lot of stresses in their workplace, and obviously a lot of the issues do come more from the top and they're systemic down. For example, they only get 2 weeks of online training now, and they used to get 6 months of training. They've lost their institutional history. So we're trying to sort of float the idea of, can we do outreach to the union, and can we bring training to the union on sort of an outreach so that they have a better appreciation for the institutional history, and they have a better appreciation for what injured workers deal with, because they're not getting that in their training. So those kinds of concepts where we can be sort of not working and doing outreach, and that's where it's really important to have the injured workers perspective and story. And I know for sure at Prevention Link we do offer scholarships, and it's always really enjoyable and such an eye-opener when we have injured workers in our courses, because they then, our union reps, get to hear directly from the people that are affected. So it's that sort of networking, and definitely labor is interested and wants to be a part of this. And just to wrap up, so Steve joined us yesterday at our OFL Comp committee meeting, and we were just having a nice chat here today, and you asked if that was helpful, and I can't stress enough that it is, so I don't know if there's a way to sort of regularly have you or somebody else. I know it's not always easy to come from Thunder Bay, but it is helpful for our comp reps, our comp nerds as we are, to hear that perspective and keep that alive, because the personal is political, and these are the people that are taking that back and doing that work. So thank you.
I just want to kind of build on that. Thanks so much, Erin. So some of the things we've tried to do, we're spread out all over the province, is in our links with organized labor is to get a seat at the Labor Council meeting, so that we're there and can share once a month a little bit of information. We've also worked with some of the unions to create an injured worker caucus within the union for your own members. And we were successful with CUPE in particular, and a couple of locals with CAW back in the day that did then create. And that means you've got friends around who are going through the same thing that can support you through that, but they can also raise those issues in the larger environment.
Hi, it's John. I wanted to respond to the sister who spoke a couple of people back, who was asking what the labor movement can do. And sister, I used to sit on the CLC Disability Rights Working Group. I'm an OPSU retiree. always happy to have the chance to speak to groups. So educating your members is clearly part of it, and through lunchtime sessions or after work sessions during your meetings is one way. But things that can be done in addition to injured workers work, which is where many unions began many years ago. They may not have thought about it as disability rights work back then, but helping their own members, which is where a lot of this work began, really was disability rights work. So today, things like trying to bargain clauses into your collective agreements, trying to help members, supporting members through the grievance process, supporting members who have difficulties with their management, things at the workplace, but also the broader work that unions do. One of the things that the CLC Disability Rights Working Group developed in its infancy was the MORE campaign. Now, we understand the word more, right? We wanted unions to do more around disability rights work, but at that point, MORE was also an acronym. We wanted unions to do more around things that unions typically do. So MORE was an acronym: mobilize, organize, represent, and educate. Activities that unions regularly do. So the more that you can encourage your members to get involved, to sit on bodies like the OFL or the CLC, and to make sure that you have caucuses within your own union. These all help support your members, and supported members are often more involved members, whether they're doing disability rights work or whether they're doing overall union work. The more that we can educate our membership and encourage them to get involved, the stronger unions will be, and we need strong unions. In this country, as in the United States, the density of union membership has gone down. So we need to do everything we can to strengthen those unions we have and the membership that they have. If I can be of any help to any of you as a speaker, please let me know. I'm always happy to have a new audience. Thank you.
So I want to thank everybody who shared their thoughts and passions, and I think we've closed this session, and I'm going to turn it over to Sang Hung to wrap up.
Yeah, it was a great session, and we learned a lot, and we really appreciate all those people who work on this submission, UN submission. Well, we talk about now, we know the issue, so we talk about the action, right? So get connect each other, leave your contact information, and get our contact information, so we are in the loop. Keep in touch with us and see what we can do together. Okay, so thank you very much, all the panelists, all the audience, and it was a great session. Thank you.